At the highest level, what we are unlearning is, what does it mean to be human? What is our comparative advantage in the workplace as human workers? And this is actually why I think there's a lot of anxiety around jobs. The jobs anxiety is really a conversation that people don't know that their comparative advantage that they've built up, their expectations around, is actually going to be relevant in the future. And so what we are unlearning and relearning is, what is this dynamic going to be? What is this new cultural environment of rules, tools, and norms going to look like when we have now a multi-sapiens workplace, right? Where it's not just Homo sapiens calling all the shots and making all the decisions anymore and doing all the high-level thinking anymore. Right? We're going to have AI sapiens working alongside Homo sapiens. What does that look like? And how am I going to create my value as a human being?
Here's the uncomfortable truth about AI. The gap isn't between companies, it's between leaders. Same tools, same access, same hype, but completely different outcomes. Why? Because AI exposes how you think. Your decision making, if it's unclear, AI will expose it. If your system is strong, AI compounds it. Across the executives I've worked with, from Slack to HSBC to American Airlines, the ones who win don't use more AI. They use it deliberately. They build a personal system, capture their thinking, pressure test their decisions, turn every interaction into a reusable asset. We call it the CSTA loop in action. And the results, they're pretty consistent. 3 to 4x more meaningful decisions, up to 60% less preparation time, and faster alignment across their teams. This isn't about becoming an AI expert, it's about becoming a better decision maker. All captured in our book, Artificial Organizations, out now. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode, and it greatly supports our podcast. AI is not simply changing how work gets done, it's challenging leaders to rethink what people uniquely contribute, how organizations create value, and who's accountable when intelligent agents begin making decisions. Now, Tatyana Mamut is the CEO of Wayfound, former CPO of Nextdoor, and has led teams at Amazon, IDEO, Pendo, Salesforce, and more. We first met many years ago in Australia when we were both keynoting on the future of work. Now, she brings an unusual, powerful perspective to this conversation, drawing on anthropology, economics, org design, and being a senior product leader. She looks beyond technology to the human systems surrounding it, the rules, tools, norms, incentives, and relationships that determine how organizations actually perform. In this episode, we explore what it takes to move beyond sort of isolated AI experiments and build responsible operating models for human and machine intelligence. Tatyana understands that successful AI adoption is not just a software challenge, it's an organizational design challenge. This conversation offers leaders a practical way to think about AI without being driven by fear or hype. So you'll learn about deploying agents, what requiring new approaches to governance, incentives, supervision, and accountability, and why subject matter experts closest to the work must be equipped to manage the agents working alongside them. I'm excited to share this show with you all. It's fascinating insight for leaders who will succeed are simply not going to deploy more AI. They'll consciously redesign the systems in which humans and intelligent agents work together. Let's dive in. It's fantastic to have you on the show. I think we met in Australia. I'm afraid to say how many years ago because I can't remember, but we both had a chance to speak at a great conference run down there. And yeah, instantly I was sort of really amazed with all the great things that you were doing. You've even gone on to do even more amazing things, product leadership at Nextdoor, at Pendo, all these great businesses. And currently now you're working on a fantastic Wayfind, which I'm excited to talk a lot about. But when many people sort of maybe look at your story, your backstory, you know, like it's always, I think, hard for folks to sort of sometimes see, like, how did you recognize when it was the time to transition, to do the next thing? Like what inspired that thinking? So if you look back on your own career, was there a moment where maybe it didn't mean a whole lot at the time, but in retrospect, you're like, oh no, this is this was sort of a real turning point about how I thought about, how I was going to approach, what I wanted to focus on?
I would say really the biggest turning point is when I shifted from a focus on economics to a focus on anthropology in kind of my frame of reference in terms of how I think about the world and how I think about the economic systems that really govern our world and that form our organization. So, a little bit about me. I've always been like the black sheep in my family because my mother's an engineer, my father's an engineer, my brother's an engineer, my grandmother's an engineer, my aunt's an engineer. And I was much more interested in social science than engineering. And I was like, I'm still surrounded constantly by engineering conversations in all aspects of my life now. But I was really interested in social systems and social dynamics. And because of that, I was drawn, because of the strong focus on math in my family, as you can imagine, to economics and economic statistics, economic modeling, understanding how humans behave through math, right, and through economic modeling. And what I quickly discovered is that all economic models essentially fail. And that was very present if you look at the fact that we're terrible at predicting and forecasting when economic downturns will happen. And this was really relevant in the late 1990s when I was doing my economic research on post-Soviet Russia, when the 1998 economic collapse happened. And literally the best economists in the world did not predict it, was not baked into their models. So I shifted from economics to really to focusing on anthropology and thinking about how mental models and social institutions frame what's possible for humanity. That then took me into a very interesting foray, which we can talk about, and which has really shaped how product innovation happens in the organizations that I lead, that I think lead to really breakthrough outcomes because we think in a more expansive way through modeling how consumers and customers think about the world, not just the transactions that they make currently.
Yeah, and I love that because, again, I think when we had met, you'd done so many interesting things already, right? Like you'd worked in Leo Burnett in a creative agency, you'd been at IDEO. And I love this idea of sort of organizational anthropology. It's probably one of my favorite sort of notions. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're probably able to say, does this field exist yet? But at the time, I was like, it's so interesting to me about using these tools of discovery, of curiosity. And you'd obviously at the time started to build frameworks around this to help people systematically use these methods that are in other domains in the technology sphere. So just maybe for folks who maybe have heard the word anthropology, but really, can you bring it to life a little bit with, how you think about it, especially in the guise of technology?
Sure. So, the fundamental object of analysis in anthropology is culture, right? So, and everybody talks about organizational culture, and I think you and I met, right, at in Australia, in Sydney, right, when I was giving a talk on cultures of innovation. I believe that was the topic of my keynote. And when you actually take an anthropological lens and an ethnographic lens to what is an organizational culture, you don't get things like kombucha on tap and slides down, in the lobby, and whether you work remotely or not. Although those can be sort of symptoms of the way that an organizational culture is organized. And, I helped to found the organizational design practice at IDEO and grew it from nothing to the biggest practice in the Bay Area because we really understood culture and organizational culture in a very useful, pragmatic way, right? Which is you break down what are the elements of culture, what are the building blocks of culture, what are the so one of the things is incentives, right? How do you actually set up the incentives for why people will behave the way that they do? Then you have things like, how do you define hierarchy, status, relationship, and all of those relationships in which people accrue status, right? And all organizations and actually all human societies have some sort of status hierarchy. When they are invisible and you try to deny the status hierarchy, that's when those things become very toxic because they still emerge. You're just often unconscious about how it's emergent, so that you're setting up status dynamics. You're also designing things like what are your communication systems, right? Then we also, of course, think about what are the processes and tools, right, that your organizations work. So, technology is an important institution as well. What are the technologies that people have access to, and how do those technologies interact with the processes that humans are intended to apply those technologies within? And then beliefs also. The belief structures are very important. And the overall framework that I developed for my PhD dissertation, but then we also kind of revived it for IDEO org design practice, was this framework of when you're designing an organization culture, you're designing the intersection of three things. Basically, rules, tools, and norms, right? So the rules, we all know. It's like, what's in your employee handbook? How are people meant to behave? Or all the things that are, all the processes that are written down. Then the tools, right? What are the systems? What are the technologies? What are the things that you have access to actually do your work? But then the most important thing is the unwritten norms. And those things are very hard to design. And that's where you're thinking about beliefs, status, right? Incentives, all of those things come together to form that kind of, those three kind of pillars of organizational culture that can be designed very consciously.
A quick pause before we jump back in. If you've read Artificial Organizations and found it valuable, I'd really appreciate a small favor: an honest review on Amazon. It helps leaders discover the book and supports our work in helping people rethink leadership in the age of AI. The link is in the show notes if you'd like to leave one. Thanks so much. And now, back to the conversation. Yeah, and this is why I really want to especially talk to you about this, right? Because I think we're going through a fundamental redesign, both individually about how we work, collectively, organizationally, the whole lot, right? And you've obviously recognized that. You started Wayfound as a way to sort of bring that to life too, as well, right? And
yes.
So the thing I'm super interested in, and just for folks, so Wayfound is obviously an AI agents. They require supervision and like as you say, a proactive environment, right? So this is kind of super fascinating to me at the moment as, we're building these types of, to your ideas, this rules, tools, and norms, right? Which is, I think, is a really healthy, fun framework to talk around this event, right? There are the human systems, there's the technology systems, there's the governing of those systems, there's the norms and incentives to drive the behaviors that we want. So maybe talk to us a little bit about, just to start, like maybe something people might need to think about on learning about when they're redesigning their own personal work. And then maybe we can go on and talk a little bit how organizations might need to think about that too as well later, right? So what are some of the things maybe you think people need to unlearn about redesigning, how they work to leverage the most of these new technologies?
Well, let me start at a high level, and then Barry, you can drill me down to the more and more practical level. Remember, my actual PhD is in anthropology, so I take a very long arc and a very kind of systems level perspective on what's happening right now. At the highest level, what we are unlearning is, what does it mean to be human? What is our comparative advantage in the workplace as human workers? And this is actually why I think there's a lot of anxiety around jobs. The jobs anxiety is really a conversation that people don't know that their comparative advantage that they've built up, their expectations around, is actually going to be relevant in the future. So what we are unlearning and relearning is, what is this dynamic going to be? What is this new cultural environment of rules, tools, and norms going to look like when we have now a multi-sapiens workplace, right? Where it's not just Homo sapiens calling all the shots and making all the decisions anymore and doing all the high-level thinking anymore, right? We're going to have AI sapiens working alongside Homo sapiens. What does that look like? And how am I going to create my value as a human being, right? So what we need to unlearn, our entire identity has been focused on being the smartest person in the room, right? But now when you can no longer be the smartest person in the room because anybody with a Claude tab open or Claude Cowork open on their computer is just as smart as you, what is your actual value as a human worker, right? This is where I think a lot of the anxiety comes from. And as soon as we actually confront and name that anxiety and move past it to say, like, look, in the Industrial Revolution, we underwent the same anxiety, which was humans were the comparative advantage was to move things and build things, right, and do all the lifting and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so it was really focused around our bodies and our manual labor. When the manual labor went away, we shifted to the mental labor. And now that the mental labor is going away, what's left? Well, humans are, lots of other things other than just physical and mental beings, right? We are also beings of energy and performance and persuasion. And there is so much more capabilities that we haven't actually explored and exposed completely. And that is where humans that lean in to kind of moving past just defining ourselves through our mental labor will really thrive. And where this new culture, organizational culture of AI agents being able to do a lot of the rote mental work, where there will be a lot of advantages there for companies that lean into that really quickly.
Yeah, so look, I love this, right? This is like one of my favorite topics right now. So again, delighted to have you to talk about this with. So the thing that instantly strikes me as you're sharing this is one of the most comfortable things I've seen with a lot of people is they've never really stopped and asked themselves some of these sort of like first principles, fundamental type questions about, how do I do my best work? What's the unique capabilities that I bring to the table? So they're sort of almost like a little bit asleep at the wheel to a certain extent. We've been so conditioned that the job is showing up and taking a task and executing a task with our mental fortitude, and then that's it, right? Rather than sort of a little bit of sort of self-reflection to think about, how do I do my best work? What are some of my unique talents? And how do I get the most out of them? How do I pair with a machine to cover my gaps or to accelerate those unique characteristics I have, right? So to me, when you talk about, again, this idea of anthropology, this is a little bit of a moment of self-discovery, I think, for many people who don't have tools to do that, because we're very rarely are we given those tools. Maybe if you're lucky, you're exposed to some exec coaching or aspects or personal development tools. People get a little bit of a glimpse into that, but for many people, the job has been, show up, be smart, study, regurgitate the information, like have tenure, have a political sort of nous in the business. So how can we help people as they start to just do a little bit of introspection maybe at this moment, rather than necessarily feel fear and anxiety, but actually go, look, I have some unique capabilities. I have the ability to make judgment in uncertainty. I have the ability to recognize patterns. I could codify my intuition. Like what is intuition? Like what do I really look for when I'm making decisions? Some of these challenges people have to face. So how can we help folks like that get started on their sort of first steps to start getting the most out of this environment as it's starting to emerge?
Yeah. So let me tell you what I think that there's a place to start. If you're in a kind of traditional organizational environment and you have, kind of a traditional job, and you're kind of thinking about what are the areas that I need to lean into in order to be, creating even more value for myself in the future. Again, I think there's a lot more areas, by the way, than these four that I'm going to first outline. But I think these four are the easiest to start with and probably most relevant to most people today. So the four to focus on is taste, judgment, relationships, and performance. And here's what I mean by that. You want to be really great and spiky in 1 to 2 of these. You don't have to be great at all of them, by the way, right? And as we move into, workplaces and organizations that have more and more of their kind of rote mental labor being done by AI agents, The taste piece is really important. So this is for the great designers. This is by taste I mean great aesthetic judgment, right? I am not spiking on this by the way. Even though I worked at IDEO, I am definitely not good at this. But I recognize designers that are. Because yeah, like the eye, or like my daughter has amazing just judgment. Like she can spot AI generated content way faster than I can, right? And she knows what looks good, what doesn't look good, well, also what sounds good, right? She's like, oh, that's auto tune. And like instantly she's like, oh, that's auto tune and it's wrong in this way. And like that kind of capacity, right? AI needs that, cannot do that, right? It will generate 4 different options for you. The person with great taste will tell you which 2 of those are absolutely terrible and which one is like okay, and how to prompt that one to be better, right? So taste. Judgment is like taste, only slightly different. It's like the non sort of artistic or aesthetic version. And I think it's also what you said about intuition, Mary, which is like, again, like guiding AI systems, managing agents, really understanding when we can do anything with these great mental capacities, what is worth doing? Where is the world going? What is the intuition, or how do I anticipate the correct future for where we should actually guide our organization? Judgment is about strategy. It's about anticipation. It's about intuition. It's about knowing what should be done when many things can be done with the intelligence at hand, okay? Then relationships, right? God, relationships are even more important. Are you kidding me? It is impossible now. I don't know how people who don't have relationships sell anything in B2B software anymore, because I just ignore every email I get because there's so much email slap, right? And cold emailing and LinkedIn, and now like people calling me, and I'm just like, stop it, So relationships are super important. And in fact, like salespeople who have great relationships and who know how to build great relationships will be even more valuable, because guess what? They're going to have the AI agents writing all the emails and doing all the Salesforce updating and doing all the stuff that they don't want to do. So they can really focus on those human relationships and building trust so that they can get those deals done and those more doors opened for them, right? And the third one is performance. Performance means, look, AI is just, it's not very motivating, right? Like nobody's going to go, like, I know like there was like, remember that AI Drake thing, right? Like, sure, there's AI Drake, but guess what? The only reason why anybody was even interested in it is because it was Drake. Like, would you go see AI Joe in concert? Like, no, nobody's going to pay for that. No, that human element of energy, and especially getting up on stage, whether it's the stage in your organization, in your company, or your all hands for your team, or whether it's a stage for customers, right? Like a Dreamforce or something, being able to show that energy and motivate, a crowd of people to really believe in what you're saying through your human energy is something that AI cannot do. It can write the speech for you, but it cannot deliver it and perform it in the way that a human being can. So you want to be spiky in at least one of those areas and really develop it, ideally 2. But that's, I think, where a lot of people can start, where they can start to find places to hone and to develop.
Yeah, this is great. I think it's really helpful for people to start getting some of these mental models, as you said, and frameworks. One that I think is really interesting of those that you've shared is relationships, right? Because it is uniquely human. And, some of these age-old adages of you can never sort of underinvest in building your network or building relationships with people. It's sort of a nice juxtapose to this world where you do open your feeds and you're overloaded by these massive marketing budgets of these huge frontier lab models, where they're essentially telling you as a person that you're becoming obsolete, right? That you're too slow, that the jobs are going away, that if you haven't used our product, your skills are unvaluable anymore. Ooh, right? And yet all of the research in the market, I think the good, well thought out research continually shows that these tools are actually enhancing opportunities for people. and that jobs necessarily aren't going away. Much more to the point you've been making is that the administrative side of work is reducing. Therefore, the opportunity for the creative problem solving side of work is increasing. So if we take our salesperson example, yes, updating Salesforce is becoming easier so they can spend more time building that and nurturing that relationship, right? So I think these are really important things for people to remember that are uniquely human. The ability, as you say, to make judgment calls, both aesthetically, objectively, and the ability to perform, right? So one of the things I've written down, funnily on my desk, is this Post-it note, right? And it says, "Keep telling authentic stories."
Yes.
And the important thing to, I think, is, again, it sort of ties into what you're saying here is, for me, like, nobody can tell my stories. Nobody can share my lived experiences, and they are just my opinion, but they're real, they're authentic, and you cannot sort of create them, right? You're performing them. They're your lived experience. They build your relationships. They tie into, my taste of what I think. As again, it's an opinion. Not saying that it's perfect, but it's, again, a viewpoint. So, as you know, when you're now out there, you're starting to build not only necessarily your individual support systems around you with your systems of work, your agents that pick up the administrative work that you may want to hand off to them, that may support you to make your higher order decisions. Let's talk a little bit about the organization piece now, right? So what are some of those mechanisms and principles that people should start thinking about as we're moving out of this idea of AI experimentation into AI almost supported operating models, where the rules are obviously defined, but the tools, both the human systems and the technology systems now, especially the technology systems, are starting to have greater levels of automation and autonomy built into them. So can you talk a little bit then about some of the mental models you're helping companies with, just as you've shared both at an individual level there, but now maybe as they're starting to think about for their company, what are some of the tools or frameworks that could help them?
Yeah, I think the headline that that really bridges from the individual to the organizational level as well at this particular moment is fear is the enemy of progress. Okay.
Right on.
So
Yeah.
I see so many people afraid, right, of change and afraid of what's going to happen. And I also see organizations just like both afraid that they're going to become irrelevant. So they like dive in headlong into trying to use AI tools as if they're traditional software systems. And then guess what? They're not. And then they step back and they're like, oh my God. And then they get into this like fear-based mentality because they don't know how to work with this new type of technology, right? With this, and there's more and more research coming out that AI, Ilya Sutskever has been talking about this for years. It's not software, right? It's a brain, right? It's a brain that's more like your brain and my brain than it is like a programmed software, piece of software. And that shift for people it's taking just a really, really, really long time for people to make that shift. And I believe by talking to many, many product leaders and CIOs and CISOs and board members, that the primary motivator there is fear. That they are afraid of changing too much or afraid of changing their perspective or afraid of what it will mean if we, admit that this isn't actually just traditional software. So number one, get out of the fear, right? And get your organization out of the fear.
Right.
And then the second thing is, yes, this is not software. Like, this is not programmed. It's not programmed. It is a brain. Like, AI agents behave like, at the back end, right? There's a brain, right? That's actually making decisions, that's trying to interpret information in the same way that another type of brain, right, would interpret it. So you need different mechanisms for governance, for control, for permission. And again, that governance system, we know how to govern brains that are hard to steer at an individual basis, right? And it's called our, organizational management systems. And so that's why we built Wayfound, was to create an AI supervisor that behaves just like a frontline supervisor for human workers, right? Which is, it watches what the agents are doing. It understands. It's a supervisor. It's not like an LLM as a judge, single turn eval, because it's not just looking at, did the agent pass or not pass this particular eval? It's looking at the full context of the organization. What are the rules of the organization? What are the goals of the organization? What are the cultural norms of the organization, right? What does good look like for this organization? The supervisor is actually learning all those things in its own context, and then applying that learning about the organization, what good looks like, as the agents that it's supervising are working, and then basically stopping them when they are doing something wrong, reprompting them, and giving them feedback to improve, very importantly. So we're applying the same type of, management systems that we know work for humans, right, to AI agents. And it works exceptionally well, right? We have about a dozen, enterprise customers, B2B customers that have been working, with our supervisor for, some of our customers have been with us for, almost 2 years. And it works exceptionally well to supervise and control AI agents, like applying the learnings that we have from human systems.
Right. So the one area I'd love to ask you more about this is incentives, because I think that's one of the things probably people are, wondering is, what's the incentive for an agent? So that's really kind of interesting to me. Or at the same time, as you're starting to design these systems, what shifts about human incentives, about contribution and recognition of how they're working. So what have been some of the things that you've learned so far through the work at Wayfound? Well,
for better or for worse, it seems that the AI labs have done a really good job of making sure that the underlying LLMs are extraordinarily sycophantic, which means that their number one incentive is to make you happy.
Use more tokens. Use more tokens.
Not more. Yeah. No, actually, they don't care about. I have not empirically seen any evidence for AI agents wanting to use more tokens, except for the fact that they have been trained. I think it's in post-training that they have been trained to continue to get engagement from the user. So that's why it appears that they're actually token hungry. I haven't seen zero empirical evidence for that being an incentive, but the sycophancy in terms of making the human happy, right, actually creates this weird feedback loop where they continue to engage you more and more and more in conversation, because somewhere in the training, they have been told that continued engagement is a proxy for the human is happy. That's what I think. But so yeah, the sycophancy thing is a very interesting thing that seems to be baked into the models. It may be baked in post-training, but regardless, it's in there. And it actually is a really interesting thing to understand the reward function. So the sycophancy thing actually creates a lot of non-compliance of AI agents in production. And I'll give you a very concrete example to help explain what I mean by this. We work with a lot of customer service agents, right? A lot of customer service agents are supervised by Wayfound. We actually switched our AI agent on our website from our custom built and Agentforce agent that was like a sales agent to an intercom fin agent, just because we know that that's optimized for customer service, and we wanted to learn more about the intercom fin agents and how they work. So the interesting thing about customer service agents is their reward function is usually close the case, high NPS score, right? That's kind of the definition of success for most customer service agents. And in almost all of their guardrails inside the agent, the company will write, never offer refunds, never suggest refunds, or escalate to a human if, the customer asks about refunds. Interestingly, Agents, most of the time, stay within their guardrails. However, there are these crazy edge cases that you will not see if your agent is not supervised, because it's like 1% to 2%. It's like a very, very small number, but it does happen, where the customer or the user will start to get so frustrated with the agent, and the agent starts to now infer that the only way to reach its goal, close the case, high NPS, is to suggest a refund. And so it does it. And it does it because it's actually trying to do the right thing. But it's not, right? It's actually now being non-compliant. That's why you always need a supervisor to catch that 1% to 2% in the case of a customer service agent. In the case of other workflow agents, right, that 1% to 2% compounds as you have 5 agents kind of all strung together working on one workflow, right? So now you get a much higher non-compliance rate in a multi-agent workflow. But even in one agent, because the agent is trying to be sycophantic to the user, you will get non-compliance.
Yeah, these are great examples, I think, to bring the edge cases to life, right? Where to the letter of the law, the machine is operating within the boundary conditions that you have set. And yet, you can be interpreted as you're describing that you say, like the administrator says, never offer refund. And yet the machine says, well, I'm not offering one, I'm going to suggest one. Right. Which again, not breaking the letter of the law, but the intent may be mismatch as you're sort of describing there. Right. And that is.
But it also accomplished its goal, right? High
correct,
NPS,
yeah.
As soon as it suggests a refund, the customer is super happy. Thank you so much. Case is closed, resolved. High NPS score. Intercom gets paid. Ka-ching! Fin agent is successful. But is it?
Yeah, it is it exactly. And this is why I love. For me, again, it's probably the most interesting part about all of this is we're not. It's another one of these skills that we've probably not intentionally have developed in our world so much to date, is very good clarity around incentive design, and then also management of behavior towards driving incentive and goal, as you're describing here, right? And again, it's why it's interesting, again, what you're doing with Wayfound, because machines are going to behave at an exponential rate. You can't monitor them all, or you can now, right? And
we can with another AI agent.
Exactly,
yeah.
right? And where, again, if you take this down to human systems, that type of behavior, again, will happen, right? But the way we may have managed that before is that some operator would go to their manager and say, look, I've tried everything to keep this customer happy, but they're not. And then eventually the manager can sign off and say, right, actually, we should, whatever, refund in this instance. But it's management by objection, right? It's again, but it's a human system. It can be slower and so forth, right? Might be more empathetic, but yet. So this is sort of, again, really interesting to me, even as people then, it goes into a little bit of the fear mentality you've said, right? I think fear is a really bad place to be designing from. I couldn't agree with you more. And yet, I think people struggle with it. Certainly, I still do as well, because there is this notion of unawareness and naivety about building these new systems for the first time. Is we don't really know what's going to happen, right? So our strategy is to sandbox, it's to do small scope, and it's very easy then just to fall into this world of endless experimentation, and never to moving to a system of operation type scenario, right? Because we're always in pilot mode, and again, this is sort of lots of research, again, loads in artificial organizations about 90% odd of these experiments never get out of pilot, right, into real productionized systems at the moment, because there is a hesitancy still from leadership to trust it, to let it out of the sandbox, whatever it might be, right? So I think, and that's the big unlock ultimately for companies. So what are some of the things, as again, you're starting to address this at a sort of agent level where you have as you say, this sort of guardian angel or this system to monitor the monitors, or so to speak.
Right, exactly.
What are some of the maybe just sort of human things as well that you would maybe be getting some of these leaders to think about as well when they're trying to get out of the pilot or experimentation mode into productionization?
Yeah, I think the big question is who, like, one of the other structural issues within organizations is who is actually responsible for the agent post deploy. Like, everybody knows who's responsible for the agent when it's getting built, right? It's like the engineer, the PM, they're getting the specs and requirements from, the sales team or the marketing team, and they're implementing it, right? And IT is really responsible. But like post deployment, who's responsible for knowing if the agent has handled this particular edge case well, and for understanding, right, like what it is actually supposed to be doing? Because it can't be the IT team, right? Like
Right.
the IT team cannot be the experts. That's actually one of the reasons why coding agents are much more widely deployed across organizations than other types of agents, is because the people who own the agent and the people who are subject matter experts in coding are the same people.
Yeah, it's
Right?
like it's DevOps movement, right? You
Yeah,
build it, you run
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you have a sales agent, the subject matter experts are the salespeople. They are not the engineers. So you need to equip the salespeople to have direct control over their AI agents and direct lines without playing telephone with the engineering team. Every time the salesperson needs to go to the engineer to get a transcript to see if the AI agent responded correctly to a cut, like, you've already lost, like you're done. You've lost. There's too many, hops in that thing. There's too much latency, right? It's too manual. You need to give the people who are subject matter experts. If you have finance agents, the finance team needs to have direct control over what are the agents doing, what are their, what does good look like for them, what are the edge cases that they forgot to give them. They're on the phone with a customer. The customer just got something from the agent. They need to be able to pull and see and read the entire transcript themselves without slacking somebody in IT. So I think that's really the human aspect of, like, the fact that everyone now has to become an agent manager. And we need, to your point, like to the point about, like, if the rule is that the subject matter experts now are going to be augmented by AI agents, and the norms are for a lot of this rote work in every department to be done by AI agents, then you have to give the subject matter experts the tools to have direct control over their AI agents without having to have the engineers or the IT team be the middleman.
Great. Yeah. No, and I think execs really need to hear this, right? And individuals need to hear this too as well, because as we say, it's not necessarily only going to be about me individually. Like, how do I do my best work? What are the unique talents that I have, as you described, with taste, judgment, performance, all these aspects. We have to grow to the moment as well. And I think this, like I said, this is one of the things that was always fascinating about the DevOps movement for me. For years, in the good old days of software engineering, somebody built it and then they gave it to the ops team to run, and the ops team were like, what the hell is this? How do we manage it? We've just, again, shrunk that set of parties to really be the subject matter expert, could be the sales leader, as you're describing. Whether they can no code or use these agents to build software for them or not, or an engineer builds it for them, so be it. But they need to become an operator of the systems that they're asking to be created for them, and manage those systems. And again, that is a new skill, I think, that is probably not obvious to a lot of people yet. But it's a pattern that we've learned in software engineering before. You worked at Amazon. The notion of, you build it, you run it. And
Right.
so
That's
I think these things are sort of really important, I think, for leaders and individuals to hear is that is going to have to be a growth area for many folks, which again could be exciting.
I actually do think with AI agents, it's okay for the engineers. Like, if you think about AI agents, it's more like hiring a new employee. It's okay for the recruiting team to be the ones that do the initial hire. But the recruiting team can't be the team that is coaching the salesperson or managing the entire sales team along with the marketing team, along with the finance team, along with the product team. You know what I mean? So I think of like the engineers that are building AI agents kind of like the recruiting team, the analogy of the recruiting team. When I was chief product officer and I was recruiting for a new PM, I would write the job description, the specs, hand it off to the recruiting team, right? They would give me the initial, right, build, the initial, set of candidates, right? And then I would then iterate along the way to get the best one, make sure it was performing, keep improving it, giving it like guidelines, feedback. And so that's the way to think about it, right? You don't have to be able to build an AI agent if you're a business user. You can rely on your IT team or your engineering team, just like your recruiting team, right, to give you the initial build, right, to get you the person in the door, to get the agent can come in the door via another team, but ultimately you are responsible for growing that agent, making sure it's compliant, making sure its performance is improving, making sure that it continues to grow and to function in the way that you need it to function. That's how I think about it.
Tatyana, it's been great to have you on the show. I think there's so many fun emerging themes in this space. I'm delighted we've got to talk about a few of them on the show today. Great work as well with what you're doing with Wayfound, and I look forward to having you back on the show again to share more of the other things you're learning in the sort of months and years ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.